Hello, I'm Richard Burton from the Richard Burton Art Centre here on the Yorkshire coast, and today I'm going to ask you a simple question. Have you ever tried painting snow? The weather's changed, it's got much colder. I'm out now and about and you can really feel that difference. And the opportunity now is to really show how watercolour you can really capture some wonderful snow effects. And it's not difficult, it's easier than what you think. And I'm going to show you that today. Now this video is going to give you an opportunity to really understand the true magic of watercolour, which is about how to paint on the different dampness of the surface. So there's wet, what I call damp, where the water's soaked into the paper. Then there's moist, which is still got some dampness in, but going towards dry, and then there's painting on dry. Those elements are so crucial to watercolour, and there's no better than painting a snow scene to show you how we can actually utilise those to the really best. The scene here is down in one of our fields. With the morning light, we've got this wonderful covering of snow. All of a sudden, everything looks spectacular. The light was low, capturing the shimmering on the top of the snow, and there's some wonderful reflections, well not reflections, shadows I should say, catching across from the field. And I wanted to capture that moment, and I thought it was really no way better than to capture it in watercolour. So let's have a go. And before I forget, I mustn't forget to include our watercolour guide. This is something we've been working on all year really, and we've got nearly 3,000 of you have signed up to this. This is a free guide for those of you coming back to watercolour or new to watercolour. It's 5 steps into watercolour. There's some really simple techniques in there to just get you inspired, get you back into watercolour. And if you'd like it, it's a free copy, totally free. It's in the link below. All you need to do is click on the link below and enter your details, and we'll send you a copy. Okay, so we'll start with putting the paper down. The paper is a 300 gram not surface paper that's cold pressed, and we're going to tape it down with some masking tape. Okay, so we'll start with the drawing. And obviously we've got this snow scene with the light coming through the trees. It's an early morning light coming through the trees and cascading through the trees and creating these lovely reflections. Well, I'm not going to worry about reflections. That's all going to be done with the brush and the paint later. What I want to do is establish the horizon line, which is going to be the hedge line. So that's a little bit under halfway on the picture. Draw that across, and from that I'm going to put a few other marker points, put them at the marker stakes, and then I'm also going to put the 2 main trees. But just concentrate on getting a feel for the shape of the branches, a feel for the shape and size of that bush cum tree really. And then once I've done that, I'll then work my way across the page and put a few of the other hedge line bushes in, and also then I'm working to the horizon. I'm going to establish a horizon line which sort of leads your eye into the far distant village. And that will conclude pretty much all of the drawing. Next, I'm going to use some masking fluid with a dedicated number 4 brush, and I'm going to put this masking fluid to protect the area where the sun is coming through the trees, because we're going to put some big washes on there, and they'll just protect that highlight, which is going to be so important for this painting. Now to the painting. We'll start with our colour story. I'm going to have cooler colours on the right, warmer on the left to start off with. I'm going to concentrate on the sky. I'm going to use a number 16 brush to establish the blue, the nice lovely darker colours, and then I'm going to use a number 12 to establish the warmer yellow ochre colours. And the colours are going to be cobalt blue and yellow ochre with a little bit of alizarin crimson. First thing, I'm going to wet the paper with some clear water just to establish a moist and damp surface so that we can put the colours on, and want the sky to diffuse and to mix those colours on the paper. Start with the big brush, and I'm going to put the cobalt blue in place, particularly strong at the top, and then just gently drop in a bit of water to diffuse that towards the horizon. After I've let that diffuse, I'm going to bring that down to the horizon with a little bit of clear water, add a little bit of stronger blue just as I come down, and then mix a little bit of alizarin crimson and just drop that in very pale on the horizon, along with a little bit of yellow ochre, just to give a little bit of warmth, distant warmth. Now that's the right hand side of the sky. I'm going to move now quickly over to the left. Firstly, I'm going to mix some more cobalt blue, drop that in high up in the sky with my bigger brush, and then I'm going to get my smaller brush. I'm going to put some yellow ochre into the horizon that will come down towards, well, in the sky towards the horizon. And then while that's diffusing, strengthen up the blue, and then also just as that sort of yellow ochre absorbs in and gets to that damp stage, I'm going to drop in a couple of brush strokes of yellow ochre, which will just give me, and alizarin crimson, that will just give me that little bit feeling of shadow in the sky. Those eagle eyes one amongst you will also notice that I'm going to drop in a little bit of grey in there, which is going to be alizarin crimson touching into the cobalt blue, and I'm going to drop a little bit of that darker tone into the sky just to give a further feeling of definition to the clouds. Now we'll come into the foreground and deal with that snow. And what I'm after is the light. I want to get the warmth of the sun coming through and cascading onto the snow. Just catching that under warmth. And I'm going to use yellow ochre with my number 12 brush. After I've wet the surface first, got that nice and moist. So I put that yellow ochre in, weak. And then I'm going to use a little bit of crimson to dance in amongst it. So we get that feeling of yellow and crimson, which lovely replicates that feeling of light coming through the tree and from the sky. Now the distant field, I'm going to do something similar with that little bit of a yellow ochre, just gently dropped onto a moist surface. And then once I've done that, I'm going to mix some cobalt blue and alizarin crimson, even a little bit of light red in there, and I'm just going to drop in the far distant structures. Now a little bit of suggestion of the village in the distance, and also the hedge line, both in the distant left and climbing up the sort of slight hill on the right. But make a point of ensuring that the greys in the middle are lighter than the greys on the sides, because we're looking into the light, and I want to make sure I get that differential in the tone of the colour. So it wants to be stronger away from the sun and much paler towards the sun. This distance is done on a dry surface, but into that dry, so obviously I'm putting the paint, but what happens is that the area gets wet with the paint. So I'm going to drop in a little bit of stronger dark into there and just let it diffuse. Now for the central tree, which is tree stroke brush really. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an underwash of yellow ochre and alizarin crimson. Now yellow ochre away from the sun, for the branches away from the sun, and then the crimson is going to go towards where the actual masking area is. So we've got that looking into the sun. That's an underwash. And then once I've done that, I'm then going to mix, much stronger mix of ultramarine blue, burnt umber and alizarin crimson, and that is going to be much stronger. With the small brush, number 4 brush now, I'm going to put the branches in and build up the skeleton of the tree, and that's going to create that sort of feeling of shape to the tree. But I'm going to be sparse where I put the branches where the sun is, where the masking area is. Be careful there, because that's going to be blotted out by that strong light, so I want to keep that pale. Now I want to make a pale wash of a grey using cobalt blue and light red, which will give me that, well, actually cobalt blue and burnt sienna is probably going to be better really, but a combination of the three. And then that's going to go on using a full brush of colour, but using the side of the brush. So we get a nice diffused wash over the tree. And that sort of fills in the smaller branches. And then I'm going to use a little bit of alizarin crimson and yellow ochre, and then I'm going to drop that into the heart of the tree where the sun is coming through, and also do that on a damp surface, so it gives that feeling of light coming through the tree. And then from that, I'm then going to use this darker colour again, and then I'm going to put the brush in on the right hand side, again using the bigger brush and using a wash in place, and just put the initial shape of that brush in place. And then after doing that, we'll then work on the rest of the hedge line with the lighter colours first, which is going to be mostly your yellow ochre with a little bit of possible crimson and a bit of grey in it, but it's going to be mostly the yellow ochre. Drop that in, bring that across, and then just generally fill in that overall warmer tone of the initial wash of the hedge line. Now while it's still damp, I'm going to get some of the cobalt blue and burnt sienna, that grey that's in place, and start dropping that into the moist surface of the hedge line, and particularly ensuring that it's darker towards the bottom, which is effectively the edge of the snow, because that will be important because that's the lower part. And then I'm also going to make a little bit more darker of this grey, which is going to be ultramarine, burnt umber, burnt sienna, those sort of combinations to make a darker grey, and put the other brush on the right hand side and drop that in, as well as making a stronger grey that I can again drop into the hedge line and diffuse it into the hedge line, but also use the tip of the brush to give the feeling of some of the stakes that are coming out of the hedge, also some of the fence posts, there's a little bit of grasses that are coming out, and just get that mix of strong hard edges and diffusion. And I call this what I call lost and found edges, where you are painting with a strong colour but onto a semi-diffused surface, so you get that mix of effects, and it can be really effective, particularly when you're looking at this fast and loose sort of style, looking into the sun. And now making up some stronger dark, which is going to be ultramarine, burnt umber, and a little bit of alizarin crimson. And I'm going to put some harder edges into the bushes to give that feeling of some of the branches that are coming through the light. And I'm also going to put some harder edges into the central tree. It's still going to be fairly moist, but the power of this stronger tone will show through the earlier wash, and you'll get a little bit more structure to the tree, even though it's slightly diffused. Okay, once I've done the hedge line, I'm comfortable with that stage. I'm then going to get a little bit of yellow ochre and a little bit of the cobalt blue, and just put a couple of brush marks in the distance in pale. That'll just give the feeling of connection between the very far distance and the hedge line. It'll just give some feeling of shadows and undulations in the middle field. And then I'm also going to use some of this darker grey that I've mixed and just cascade a little bit of that into the distance, particularly on the snow line, so it just gives a little bit more definition to the distant trees. But be careful not to make this too strong, otherwise it will come forward. So it's just enough just to differentiate it from the very far distant buildings, but it just gives that little bit of feeling of definition to those hedge line. And then I'm going to follow on with some much darker grey with a small brush and put a little bit more shape and structures into the hedge line with marks on the stakes and some of the grasses that are sort of shining against the light. Now it's still sort of a little bit of moisture in that hedge line, but we're going to give it a little bit more feeling of the light coming through, and capture this by putting some stronger darks, particularly into the hedge line, up against the snow line, put a few little bit more extra darks into some of the fence posts, into the tree in the middle. It all just gives that little bit more feeling of presence, that three-dimensional effect that we're after, and it can really be magical this stage. I know it's converse, it's the opposite of what you think, but the point here is to really put the darks in and they make the lights come to life. Now it's nearly dry, but it's still a bit of moisture, and I'm now going to do this dark brushwork with the small brush. I'm going to put some really strong darks into the trees, into the bushes, and that again will just give them life. It will make the feeling of the light coming through, and it will really give them structure, give them that three-dimensional feel. And if you get this right, it really does look really special. After I'd done that, I'm then looking at it and I'm thinking it just needs warming up a little bit in the middle. So I'm just going to get my small brush and drop in a little bit of medium tone yellow ochre into that middle. It'll just give it a little bit more life to it. Now we'll let it dry, and then I'm just going to get my finger and rub off the masking fluid, and that'll really expose that light coming through. Now we're going to give the highlight area through the trees a little bit of work. What I'm going to do, I'm going to wet the edge of that because I don't want that hard edge to show. And then once I've wet and moistened that surface, I'm going to mix a little bit of pink using alizarin crimson and a little bit of cadmium orange and drop that in around that highlight area where the sun's coming through. Just cascade that in, let it diffuse, and then I'm going to mix a little bit of yellow ochre and just drop that in around there just to give that a little bit further colour change. So protecting, making sure that you don't lose that white that's coming through. Just make sure, you might need to lift off a little bit just to ensure that you haven't lost that. And then I'm also going to use this pink and drop it into one or two of the other bushes as well, and on the hedge line, just in the central area, just to try and capture that feeling of that light just diffusing through. Okay, so now we've let that dry, and now what we're going to do, we'll deal with the snow, which is a really, truly magical bit of this painting, and these snow shadows are going to be crucial. So what we're going to do, we're going to get my big solid number 12 brush, wet the surface, lightly wet it I suppose, but make sure you have given it a good coating of water so that you aren't really missing anywhere. Make sure that's nicely settled in, let it absorb again to get to that moist surface so that we can then put the snow shadows on. And the snow shadows, we're going to start with mixing some cobalt blue, which is going to need a decent pool of this. You're going to need quite a bit ready in here for this. Once we've got that established, we're going to start from the right hand side, and we're going to put these horizontal brush lines in place, allowing some of the yellow to come through. But this is going to be the snow, and the snow is blue, believe it or not. There's a lot of blue in there. I'm going to put these brush marks on. I want to make sure that the surface of the paper is damp and not wet, so I can put brush strokes on. The brushes lines will hold their shape that I'm going to put, but they will diffuse a little bit but not disappear, so I can keep those strong brush marks in place. And that's going to be the shadow from the snow, and they're going to work my way along the hedge line, so again that's going to be deeper. And then as I come forward, I'm going to put these lovely shadows from the tree, from the bushes, and also undulations in the snow in general. And as I come forward, I'm going to add a little bit of crimson into this blue because there's a little bit of a purple blue colour in the snow in the foreground, and I'm trying to capture that. And all the time I'm going to layer this a little bit, so when I put an initial wash on, I'm also going to add a little bit more into that as it soaks in, so you get that feeling of mixed colour values in the snow. Now once we've got that blue and purple sort of shadows for the snow, I then need to let it soak in further so it moves to what I call a moist stage. So just to be clear, what we're talking about when I'm thinking about moisture paper, I mean wet is wet, damp is a sort of in between wet and dry, and then you've got moist, which is just on the cusp of being dry but still got a little bit of moisture in. And I'm looking for that moist stage, and then going to put some grey marks in. These are going to be the sort of footholes, the little bit extra shadow in the snow. I'm going to use a number 4 brush to put those in. They're going to be basically cobalt blue and a bit of burnt umber. And just drop those into the snow. They're nearly all holding their shape, these marks, but they are just diffusing a little bit because they're just not dry. They're just on that moist surface. Putting these marks, these dark marks, onto this moist surface, which is probably the hardest bit to do, in the sense that you're going to put them onto a surface that's not quite dry, and the danger is you're going to get some adverse effects like cauliflowers or a little bit of tide marks and such like. Now the key here is not to panic. Just put them in, just continue to put them in, ignore any effects that happen, and just continue to just finish the actual areas you want to cover. And then we'll have a look at it afterwards. And if it needs to be addressed, what you can do is you can fix those at the end by letting it dry, re-wetting it, and just smooth them out. Now, I'm looking at the picture. While those footholes and those marks are sort of settling in, I'm just taking an overall look at it, and I'm thinking they haven't quite got the light that I want to come through the tree. So obviously I've made a little bit of a mistake or two in the sense that I've just covered over some of the masking fluid area a little bit too much. So what I can do here is, all is not lost. What I can do here is use Chinese white, neat out the tube, and I'm going to drop in just a few marks of that bush marks into what was the masking fluid in the tree, just to reinforce the extra light coming through the tree. Next, I'm going to move from the tree straight into with a small brush with some dark again, and just drop them into some of the footholes and undulations in the snow, just to give them that little bit more three-dimensional effect, and with a few distant darker marks in the snow as well to help give me that little bit greater feeling of the actual snow. Now we could have finished this picture here, but in actual fact, when I took this photograph and went down there to sort of get the idea of this painting, I did have Percy, our little King Charles Spaniel, with us for a walk, and I think it would be nice, a little bit of a touch to put him in the picture, looking towards a tree, looking as though he's trying to chase a rabbit or something that's in the hedge rind. So I'm going to draw him in, draw Percy in, and then we're going to mix some light colour for his sort of highlight areas. He's a dark dog, he's a really sort of dark dog, but he's got a few little bits of ginger and highlights. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and then I'm going to put his darker fur in using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna and a little bit of alizarin crimson, and build him up gradually, and he'll just provide that nice little feature. And like we did, we took Percy for a walk in the snow. Now after I put Percy in, I'm going to use the same brush and I'm going to put a few final darks here and there using the tip of the brush, just such as little grasses that are standing proud, also a few birds in the sky, just to give that final bit of interest here and there. Once Percy's now dry, I'm going to use a little bit of cobalt blue and give him a little bit of shadow and set him in the picture. And all we need to do now is to stand back and enjoy your finished picture. Okay, so there we have it. I've put a mount round the finished painting. I'm really pleased with that. I think it's caught what we're after. We've got the light coming through the tree with the shadows in the snow, and you've got that feeling of snow with the different layers of water, the different moisture levels in the painting as we've sort of captured it using that wet, damp and moist surfaces. And there's no better way actually of being able to get a feel for that element of watercolour, which is so important. And actually painting a snow scene is a really good way of doing it. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And as you can see, we've also included Percy in the snow scene. And as a final point, I want to say a big thank you for those of you who've been following the channel since we started, because we've got 8,000 new subscribers, which is massive. And it's a really big thank you to you all, because that gets us out to a wider audience, and the channel has grown enormously so quickly. It's been a terrific experience for us all. And of course, let me not forget, you know, if you're just new to the channel, please do like and subscribe, and that just gets us picked up by a wider audience. And so another little bit of good news, the new online course is about to be launched shortly, so just keep your eye out for that. We'll be talking more about it very, very shortly. And all that's left me to say now is enjoy and keep painting.